I want to greet you all tonight on behalf of the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee. The continuing emergency in this field is something that we had anticipated. We have the emergency arising from recent Supreme Court decisions. We have the international emergency, which, of course, has a reaction upon civil liberties in the United States. Usually, in our cases, we have fought them through the courts under the excellent leadership and with the skill of our General Counsel, Leonard Boudin. But every once in a while, we come across a case which doesn't need legal talent in particular, and because it already has it, but which does require and need a public understanding and public support. And that is the kind of case that we are going to discuss here tonight. It's a remarkable case, this business of some 12 Hollywood actors and directors and writers suing some of the main studios for the blacklist. We must remember, incidentally, that at least 4 of these plaintiffs were among the original Hollywood 10 who went to jail many years ago when the House Committee on Un-American Activities was launching its great assault on the movie industry. And this case is remarkable in several ways. First, that whereas in most civil liberties cases, the people involved are defendants being brought into the dock by some government body, here we have people who are plaintiffs, who have taken the offensive. They are not on the defensive, they are themselves making the assault against reaction and against suppression of freedom. And secondly, it is very unusual to find that the Sherman antitrust law should be utilized in the cause of civil liberties. And one of our speakers will shortly explain to you how this can be. As we know, the blacklist, which has existed in Hollywood for so long, stemmed from the career and activities of the Un-American Committee and its attempt to suppress ideas in the movie industry. They didn't want fresh ideas, they didn't want radical ideas. They said that they were after communism, but what they were really after was a complete conformity of opinion in the United States. That committee, of course, in setting up this particular blacklist and in getting the blacklist idea going throughout the country, that committee received noted aid from the McCarthy Committee, headed by the late Senator, and also by the Internal Security Committee, headed by Senator Eastland, but now run mostly by Senator Dodd of Connecticut, 2 committees which have been in this field of civil liberties almost as bad as the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And I recall to you that today, as always since the foundation of the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee almost 11 years ago, we have stood for the abolition of the House Un-American Activities Committee. It's really the communication of ideas which have become the victim of these various congressional committees. They want to suppress ideas, and they don't want the easy and free communication that is essential in a democratic society. And now I want to introduce you to our first speaker, who is the main counsel for the plaintiffs in this case of Young et al. Against the movie companies. He is a man who is distinguished in the law and who only recently won a similar case against the New York Stock Exchange. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. David Shapiro.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I came up here 2 days ago to meet with members of the ECLC in preparation of this meeting. And I was fortunate enough yesterday to be invited to a reception at which I was asked a number of questions about this particular lawsuit. The questions seemed to me to be most pertinent, and I believe that they require some sort of answer, and I will try to do that in the time allotted to me tonight. The questions fall into three main categories. The first is this: why is the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, which after all is a civil liberties organization, supporting a case being brought in the courts under the antitrust laws? The second question, and I got a number of these which fall in this category, was, isn't it a fact that an antitrust case is a very difficult kind of case to prove, and therefore there's really very little chance of winning this case? And the third category of question went roughly as follows. Several people came up to me during this reception and said, I'm not an actor. I'm not a screenwriter. What does this case have to do with me? And I will start tonight with question number one and try to finish with question number three, and hope that in the course of my talk I will have answered for all of the people here these three questions. People generally believe that when we talk about civil liberties, we talk about the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and also the 13th and 14th Amendments. But it so happens that throughout the entire fabric of our culture, there exist many statutes, many laws, many court decisions, many traditions, if you please, which have sometimes a given impact that, so far as civil liberties are concerned, can be as effective and sometimes even more effective than the Due Process Clause of the 5th or 14th Amendments, or the Free Speech Clause of the First Amendment. And so it is true here with regard to the antitrust laws. Now let me give you an example. I'm going to repeat a quotation and follow it with me, and let's see if we can guess where this particular quotation comes from. Here it is. Quote, "This is a Bill of Rights, a Charter of Liberty. This is a guarantee of the right of every man to work, labor, and produce in any lawful vocation, and to transport his production on equal terms and conditions and under like circumstances. This is industrial liberty and lies at the foundation of the equality of all rights and privileges." Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a quotation from Thomas Paine. It is not a quotation from any of the writings of Thomas Jefferson. It is not a quotation from any of the gentlemen who spoke during the debates on the adoption of the Bill of Rights. It is a quotation from Senator John Sherman of Ohio, speaking on the Senate floor on March 21, 1890, in support of the passage of the Sherman antitrust law. Now, there are very good reasons why the whole philosophy of the antitrust laws has a special and significant meaning, not merely for the people that I represent in this particular case, but for all of us, and at this time. These reasons perhaps have been expressed best in what is considered by people who are concerned with the antitrust laws the most authoritative non-official work in the field, and is the 1955 report of the Attorney General's Committee to study the antitrust laws. That philosophy, of course, is best expressed in the following quotation. And I want to digress for just a moment to say that when we talk about the antitrust laws, most of us think about monopoly. We think about price fixing among industrial giants. We think about big industrial whales swallowing up small businessmen. But the philosophy of the antitrust laws is much broader than that. And here, as stated in the report, is that philosophy. Quote, "The antitrust laws reinforce our ideal of careers open to superior skills and talent, a crucial index of a free society. We emphasize that competition is desirable on principle and for its own sake, like liberty, and because political liberty is jeopardized if economic power drifts into relatively few hands. Antitrust performs the function of keeping governing power in the hands of politically responsible persons. Power to exclude someone from a trade or profession, to regulate prices, to determine what shall be produced is governing power, whether exercised by public officials or by private groups. In a democracy, such powers are entrusted only to elected representatives of the governed." And the report concludes with the following, and I think very pertinent observation. Quote, "The antitrust laws serve still another purpose. Intellectual and artistic creativeness can be imperiled by the quality of sameness imposed on us when standards of thought and form are delivered into the hands of a few businessmen." I believe that this philosophy should answer, perhaps better than any other words I might use, the question why this case is being sponsored by the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, and why perhaps it is one of the most important civil liberties cases of our time. Now let me come to question 2. Isn't this really a very, very difficult case? The fact of the matter is that technically and from a legal point of view, this case is as simple as A, B, and C. Let us ask this question. Suppose movie producer A, movie producer B, and movie producer C sit down in a room together and say, because of the political affiliations or opinions or the invocation of the constitutional privilege against self-incrimination that Mr. X, Ms. Y, and Mr. Z have taken, we're not going to employ these people. Who has been restrained? Is it Mr. X, Ms. Y, Mr. Z? Oh no. Movie producer A, movie producer B, and movie producer C have restrained themselves, and X, Y, and Z have been injured as a result. That's what this case is all about. It's just that simple. There's nothing else to it. A, B, and C sat down in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel on November 24 and 5, 1947. And they got together in an agreement and said, we're not going to employ those 10 people, and we're not going to employ anybody else whom the House Committee on Un-American Activities says is a communist. And that's precisely what they have done for 14 years. The facts are all in. They've admitted it in the course of many prior judicial proceedings, in the course of their own self-righteous testimony before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, and in the documents which are now on file in the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. That's all this case is about. A, B, and C. The trick in this case is to apply A, B, and C, which traditionally have been used as a weapon by business groups against bigger business groups in the fight for freedom of expression, in the fight for the right to dissent, in the fight, if you please, for even the right to be wrong, but for the right of the individual to create, to speak, and to think without the power of conformity destroying his own existence as an individual. That is going to be the legal trick. But in view of the philosophy of the antitrust laws, the reasons for their enactment, and the understanding that the courts and the greatest minds in the field have with respect to why the antitrust laws exist as they do, we believe that all there is A, B, and C. No more and no less than that. Now, let me come to question 3. The man said to me, I'm not an actor, I'm not a screenwriter. What's this all got to do with me? First, I'd like to observe that the only real weapon which the House Committee on Un-American Activities has is the weapon of economic reprisal. There are many individuals who have been subpoenaed to appear before the House Committee and other organizations and bodies of that kind who have been faced with the following choice. If I do not cooperate, I will be forever foreclosed from working at my job or my trade anywhere in the United States. This has not merely happened in Hollywood, California. It has occurred throughout the entertainment industry and in many other industries in the United States. And And about a year ago, I had a graphic example of that walk right into my office. But if we, through this case, can remove the fear of economic reprisal from the prospective witness, we will have pulled the teeth of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. I'd like to ask this audience some questions. Who do you think are really the victims if a writer is prevented from writing? Who suffers more? The writer or you, who is deprived of reading something important and vital and perhaps even necessary for your survival? If an actor is prevented from acting, who suffers more? The actor or you? You, the public, who's prevented from seeing and appreciating a talented performance. If the motion picture industry remains forever closed to those who are blacklisted, who suffers more? My clients or audiences all over the world who are deprived of the intellectual and emotional excitement created by their artistry? Ladies and gentlemen, this is not my client's case. This case doesn't belong to any blacklisted person at all, and it certainly doesn't belong to me. This case, this particular case, belongs to each and every one of you, to all people, everywhere, at least people who live in a society where freedom is still a respected value. That is the meaning, at least in my judgment, of what this case does and should mean to the man who said to me, "I'm not an actor, I'm not a screenwriter. What does this case mean to me?"
I find myself, at the age of 47, speaking for the first time from a public platform. I have always avoided this. It's frightened me. But my son is in the audience tonight, and I cannot afford the cowardice. The impact on his life and on the lives of those who've lived through 8, 10, 14 years of the blacklist is too bitter to discuss. We've counted our losses, waited, and fought for the day when we would have not only jobs, but names. It seemed at times a lonely fight. We've been cut off, isolated, defeated in the courts, and have had our spirits maintained only by the American Legion, which yearly announces our tremendous influence in the motion picture industry.
And yet the American Legion, while standing fact on its head and beating at it with a stick, is still closer to the truth than it suspects. The victim of the blacklist exerts tremendous influence merely by reason of his existence. He is the object lesson to all of his fellows in the creative arts. It is my proposition that the blacklist, for as long as it continues to exist, is the most potent single influence over what appears, and more importantly, over what does not appear on our motion picture screens, our television sets, and on the stage. I wish to discuss the works in progress of the non-blacklisted writer. A few weeks ago, I had a brief informal conversation with a gentleman named John Cogley, who is associated with the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, a worthy organization which is financed and maintained by the Fund for the Republic. Mr. Cogley is an upright and intelligent man, and you may remember him as the editor a few years ago of the brilliant report on blacklisting in the mass media. Mr. Cogley's organization is currently engaged in a study of the American character. And the burden of his question was this: what has been the effect of the blacklist upon the younger writers in the mass media? The question struck me as being a little overgeneralized, and one that could be answered on that level by turning on the nearest television set or a trip to the neighborhood movie. My advice to Mr. Cogley was to go and speak to the younger writers directly. But there was a special significance in the question, for me anyway, and that was the creative young mind itself. What were its values? Where did they derive from? And how did it analyze and evaluate its own problems in today's world? Had these young writers ever known the excitement of daring to speak their own personal, special, and unique vision of experience? Did they wish to, knowing that in so speaking their words must shatter some myth, shibboleth, moray, deceit, or delusion of the public image? Was there a young writer anywhere in America willing and eager to take on the repercussions of his own truth, knowing that it must shake not only the full securities of society, but his own timbers as well? I decided to take for myself the suggestion I had made to Mr. Cogley, and I should like to report to you some conversations held at different times since with younger writers. I will respect the traditions of my social group and name no names. The first writer I spoke to was a realist. He said he could not hope to fulfill himself through the mass media, that it never was not now, and never could be any more than a money market based on what would go at the box office. He claimed he was not aware of the blacklist, and not old enough to remember the stormy holocaust of the Un-American Activities Committee of the 50s.
I then asked him if he had any ambitions as a writer beyond what was dictated to him by the money market. He said he had. Someday he would like to get out of the rat race of television and write a play. Hopefully, I asked, what about? He hadn't decided yet. It would, of course, be determined by what would go at the box office on Broadway. He smiled wryly. I'd really like to write about the Freedom Riders, he said. But who would produce it? There's no movie sale in it. Why not? I asked. You're the guy who's out of work. You ought to know. It was my turn to smile. I thought you weren't aware of the blacklist, I said. He stood up. Our conversation was over. He shook my hand. His last words were, I hear no evil, I see no evil, I speak no evil. My second conversation was with another young writer, slightly more mature, who'd arrived in Hollywood via the interest aroused in some excellent drama he'd written for some of the better live television shows. He was deeply frustrated. He worked on an assignment basis. He had no choice as to the selection or development of his material. His own convictions as to quality were subservient to those of the producer. I asked this man about the blacklist. He knew of it. I asked if he thought the content of pictures was being affected by its existence. He thought it was. Producers are less and less interested in problems of a social nature, he said. They're afraid of being accused of spreading propaganda. I think the blacklist and its repercussions have created a taboo on the very subject of humanism itself. Love thy neighbor might still get by, but all men are created equal is definitely out. We speculated a while over the unhappy situation in which the basic moralities were subversive and only immorality is acceptable. Sure, he said. I'd like to dig down where the earth is hot, write about what happens to husbands and wives, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters in this dog-eat-dog world of ours, but I'd probably be suspected of wanting to abolish the family. He sighed and said, maybe I'll write a socially significant Western. Now, these two men prided themselves on being realists. And yet what they were writing had not the slightest relationship to reality, though even this they defended as being part of their reality. And so it went. Time after time after time, it all added up to the same thing. If you want to make a living as a writer, you are going to have to mouth the idiocies of the political and cultural climate of which you are a part. What's happened to us? What? Here were men of skill. Men who were talented men, who would never know the thrill that is the special property of the writer, the lonely joy and excitement at the birth of an idea that brings its creator into battle with the values of his society, a struggle that starts with one word written on a piece of paper by a man alone in a room. And almost always, if I suggested to these writers that the blacklist had an effect on what he writes, on what he doesn't write, the writer was unbelieving, or indignant, or suspicious, or apprehensive, and sometimes all four. But we are bound together, my non-blacklisted brother and I, and he is no more free than I am. From the time that man first took chisel to stone tablet, the writer's credo has been simply this: the duly constituted authority must equate with my conscience, or one of us is doomed. It's an old story, but now something new has been added. Monopoly, and terror. The historical brain rack gets tighter. The powerful ones swallow up our press, invade our magazines, obscure our poetries, reduce our novels, destroy our theater, humiliate our tradition and our culture, and warn us that if we dare to retrieve them, we will be hit with the full recrimination of the blacklist or whatever other deadly punitive measures they can devise. Let's take a good look at our theater. The machinery for comment, for reflection of humanity, for glee, for pain, for protest, has, for the most part, rusted into a showcase for Hollywood. Our playwrights offer themselves upon this sacrificial pile. They take a glorious stand on the side of their own catastrophe, and the fire of conscience is watered down, cooled by the unguents, royalties, and resale. And we have another group of playwrights engaged in the experimental abstractions of the so-called avant-garde, fleeing from the reality of a world where the values are given first to a bomb, and secondly to life. What has happened to them? Involved in the so-called examination of a life which has turned itself into an examination of the navels of their interior terrors, concluding that the evolution of man is the basic corrupter, that our social nightmares are endemic to the beast within us, the political and cultural tyrant has been incorporated into their own egos, and there is no one to fight but themselves. How safe? If they can disarm the rest of us, how comfortable for the enemy. The duly constituted authorities produce these writers, honor them, immortalize them. The anesthetized public follow suit, till we're convinced one and all that self-destruction can be fun cathartic. We, after all, are our own oppressors. When I attack the overall effect of these works and others, it's not that I see no value in experimentation, or even in the examination of our tortured psyches. The exploration of man's conflict with himself is a worthy subject. But I will not and cannot subscribe to the message of man's worthlessness. I think he is worth saving, that he is in fact the only one who can save himself. Let me come back to the blacklist and its effect on the mind of the young writer. Recently, I had the opportunity to discuss the subject with a student at one of our greater universities. He is a friend and classmate of my own son. I know this boy, and I respect him. He is an aware boy. He wants to write. He needs to write. He is extraordinarily gifted. He is majoring in creative writing, and when he spoke of himself, he spoke also of his fellow students. The one central theme through all our work, he said, is futility. We do not feel affected by the blacklist, but by the blackout in our own lives. We don't know where we're going, but we don't know where anybody else is going either. We see all the wrong things, the corrupt things, the stupid things that go on campus, at home, in the nation, and the world. But what can we do about it? Nothing. He went on to describe the general paralysis he felt, and finally he said, if a professor gets fired for his political convictions, the others get the message. Then the students, then the public. And after a while, you realize there's no point in having convictions. Because even if you did, there's no way of putting them to work. Getting kicked out of school or losing a job is one thing, but having nothing to fall back on is another. No organization, no outlets of protest, no one to talk to even. What's wrong with futility is a truth. It is a truth. It's our truth. For my young friend, the arena of struggle did not even exist. It was this student, I believe, who truly answered Mr. Cogley's question. It's not possible to speak of the blacklist in a vacuum. It's but one cog in the machinery of an overall blackout that clouds the entire American scene. Start with a blacklist of writers or end with a blacklist of teachers, doctors, scientists, and workers. We're still speaking in a vacuum. There's a tendency to plead for the individual to be restored to his rightful place in his chosen field. But who are the real victims? Who? Writers of political conscience have been removed from the mass media, but you are the mass and have drunk the poison of what has been allowed you. Teachers of political conscience have been removed from the classroom, but it is your children that have had to learn the rote of docility, of misinformation, of conformity, and in the end, futility. You have been made to live isolate from a say in your own destiny, and the Constitution itself has been found to be unconstitutional when expedient, when its great tenets bear on the questions of freedom of speech, of assembly, freedom of advocacy, freedom of political affiliation. From whom have these liberties been stolen? Not from the few victims of the blacklist, the McCarran Act, the Smith Act, but from the whole nation. It's taken but a short period of 14 years to create a wasteland of the American character, to still our voices, to try and almost kill our spirits, to ready us, to prepare us for the quietude so necessary to those who would plan new atrocities at home and in the world at large. Shall a minority of governors, presidents, premiers, kings, pashas decide the questions of life and death for us? Shall the manufacturers of poison for our minds and ammunition for our flesh make a supernova of our earth? Or shall we now begin to make the decisions for them? How else can we liberate ourselves and our children? We as citizens and parents must give them back what has been stolen from us. The blanketed arenas of protest must be opened. The arenas of protest and of action. To be properly informed is to be properly armed. And once so armed, our children and our people will know how to secure the gifts of life for ourselves and for people of all nations. Is it harder now? Yes. Is there more at stake? Yes. Is it worth whatever sacrifice to claim our own humanities once more? Yes, we have no choice. We have created an arena here tonight. Together we've created an arena. Let there be more like this one. Wherever evil raises its ugly head, let there be more arenas. For every attack on civil and universal liberties and freedoms, let there be that many more. The time has come to unsilence ourselves. The time has come to fight back. The world is our home, my friends. If we wish to put it in order, let it be known.